Good afternoon, live from Toronto on the GBKM network. This is the Chat Up Show, the show where we catch you up with a chat up of our weekly headlines. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aloydi, and I hope that you are ready to chat it up with me today. Now, as always, you can keep up with the GBKM network in various ways. You can listen and watch live 24/7 at www.gbkm.tv or www.gbkm.fm, where you can catch up on any past shows you may have missed, watch our live shows, check out our breaking news tab for more news on what's going on around the world, like, share, comment, all of that good stuff. You can also download our free app. Again, that is our free app. Just search GBKM. It's available for all iOS and Android devices. Now, the best thing about our app is you can take us on the go with you. Okay, you'll be notified every time we go live. You can listen in the car while you're walking, while you're gardening, while you're doing whatever you're doing, while you're cooking, cleaning, doing the dishes. You can listen to GBKM and take us with you on the go, connect it to your Bluetooth if you want to listen to it on speakers. And you'll be able to watch our shows live, like, share, comment, join in the conversation, check out our past shows, check out the upcoming show schedule, all of the same things as on our web radio station. So make sure you download our free app. Again, that's just GBKM. Just search GBKM for all iOS and Android devices. You can also continue to watch us on Facebook and YouTube at GBKM Network. Now for today, I'm actually inviting you to join in the conversation on our Facebook, to put in your little comments and questions that I will be reading out during the show to really help us have this discussion, have this chat up today. So make sure you check out our YouTube, Facebook, which is at GBKM Network, to join in the conversation today. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter for more information and updates on what's going on at the GBKM Network. Just search at GBKM Network and you'll be good to go, and give us a follow. Now, these last couple of weeks in Nigeria has been riddled with violence, let's say. That's possibly the only way we can truly describe what's going on. And a lot of people, the question that's going on in a lot of people's minds is, what happened? How did we get here? Why is this a thing that we see and then we move on from, that we've become accustomed to almost, dealing with the insecurity of security in the country, amongst all the other stuff that we're insecure about? Electricity, fuel scarcity now is an issue that a lot of people are the increasing rising prices of food is becoming hard to deal with. The economy, all of these things. Now, on top of that, people are having to mourn and grieve things that they shouldn't have to. Grieving the loss of their loved ones who were just on a regular train journey. Now, I kind of want to put things into perspective a little bit before we kind of dive into the conversation that we're going to have today. Is just for those of us who are not living in a country where violence is something that you see outside of your window, or something that's in the back of your mind when you leave the house, you're constantly thinking, okay, I have to make sure that I'm prepared in case this happens. I have to make sure that I'm alert in case this happens. That those of us that live in a space or in territories or in countries where we don't have to think about that or worry about whether we will be safe on the train or on the plane or taking a road trip or going to school or being in a hospital. But these are spaces and places where kidnappings have taken place. Bandits have held people at gunpoint for ransom, bombings, shootings. For Nigerians in certain parts of the country, this is life. This is what they've seen happen for years, that they've struggled with, and it feels like now we're all kind of saying enough is enough, that something needs to change. We can't be dealing with insecurity on top of insecurity on top of insecurity and then not seeing anything come of it. What's the point of all this suffering if it's not going to lead to something better in the future, if we're not going to see changes that will make living life a little easier in our country? Now, just setting the scene there, that this is things that a lot of us take for granted. And we might be thinking, well, those are just the consequences of living in a place like Nigeria. It shouldn't have to be. Why are those the consequences? And why are we just accepting them as the consequences of living in Nigeria? It shouldn't have to be. We shouldn't just accept this as this is just the way of life, and then not want more or want change for us, want better for us. And just because we live in the diaspora Some of us will think, oh, well, we're good. We're out of the country. It doesn't bother me anymore. My family's safe. Okay, but that doesn't mean that we can forget about our country completely and forget about what those that are still living there, breathing there, surviving are going through on a daily basis. We can't forget that. And just because we're in the diaspora doesn't mean our voices don't matter. Doesn't mean that we can't talk about these things. Doesn't mean we can't call for change. We can and we should. And so that's why we're having these conversations today. And that's why we're having the conversation about what's going on in Kaduna State today. Because how did we get here? Now we're going to dive into that. But first I want to give a quick overview of Kaduna State for those who don't know. So Kaduna State is Nigeria's fourth most populous state with a population of about 12 million people as of 2020. It is the political headquarters of Nigeria's northwest region, as well as its center of commercial and industrial activities. Now, with its northern population largely comprising of Hausa and Fulani Muslims, and the southern population mostly ethnically diverse Christians, Kaduna is not only one of the most geographically central, I guess you could call it, states in Nigeria in terms of the separation between Muslims and ethnically diverse Christians, but it's a melting pot almost with different groups coming together in this one state, living together in this one state. Now, I'm not going to say living together in harmony because we're going to dive into the history of what's going on in the state with these different groups, but living together, even though they are somewhat divided ethnically or religiously, north and south, it's still the same state. Now, Kaduna Centrality makes addressing the security challenges even more important because, as I said, it's a melting pot. So there are different people who are coming and traversing to the north or through the south. If you want to get to Abuja, you're going to go, as we saw with the train, you're going to go through Kaduna, or you're going to go to Kaduna from Abuja, whichever way. People traverse through the state, and it's not just a one ethnic group's own state, if you want to put it that way. I mean, most of Nigeria isn't like that anyway, but just to paint the picture of how much of a melting pot it is and how this could also influence the conflict and the tension within the state. Now, over the last couple of years, we've seen growing violence. Actually, let's say over the last couple of decades, let's be honest, because when we're going back to when we saw the 2000s riots, it's 2022. That's 22 years later, and we're still seeing tension. But in recent years, we've seen more arise, and it's caught in a lot of news coverage. Now, in July last year, gunmen kidnapped 140 school children, and according to UNICEF reports, a total of 1,400 students were actually kidnapped, and 25 schools attacked happened in 2021 alone. But just specifically in the state of Kaduna, in July, 140 school students were kidnapped. I'm just thinking here, if we're in Canada, you see 140 school students marched out of school essentially with guns, and like no security is alerted. Police, where are they? They would probably show up. Someone would have called. Someone would have noticed something was off. That 140 school children were taken by gunmen and kidnapped. How? And it's not the only time that it's happened. As I said, 1,400 students were kidnapped in 2021 alone. 1 year, 1,400 taken from schools. Schools don't usually happen at night, so it's not in the dark that this is happening. This is happening in broad daylight in the middle of the day, which really begs the question, how is this happening? How is that possible? Insecurity. Now, it's not just school children who have been kidnapped or under attack. It's people on roads, too, being terrorized by armed bandits. That's making traveling by roads quite scary for a lot of people. It's not even an option for most. Folks would rather not take the trip or the road trip because they know, well, there's a chance we might run into armed bandits, or there's a chance we might be kidnapped, so let's not do that. That's an issue in Kaduna State as well, which had a lot of people choosing to take the train as they thought that that was the last resort or the last safest option to travel, instead of going on the road, potentially being on the road at night, making you even more insecure, if you will, and more of a target. Driving at night instead of being safe somewhere, you chose the train. But even then, you find that that's not safe, because on March 28th, we saw a play-by-play, a live action play-by-play on social media of the bombings and attacks that happened on the train from Abuja to Kaduna. And sure, we could say thank goodness for social media that allows us to, disseminate information quickly, but the response that was received on social media by folks who were basically begging for their lives, begging for people to pray for them, one in particular that we're going to dive into her story a little bit later, who were begging, and seeing the response that was received on social media, either by people who were trying to figure out what was going on, or people who didn't believe that it was even happening, or people who just thought, well, why are you tweeting when you're in the middle of an attack? Focus on surviving for yourself and tweet after. Mixed reviews from a lot of people. And I guess that's what comes with posting on social media. Now, this train attack happened for a couple hours where people were screaming for their lives or just trying to stay as silent to survive. And it wasn't just a shooting that happened. There was a bomb that went off, and then there was the shootings that happened. I'm saying all of this to just help paint the picture. Paint the picture. I mentioned folks that live like here in Canada, for example, going on a train, your first thought maybe, unless of course that's something that you've experienced before, you may have PTSD with that, of course, but the average person isn't thinking, oh, I'm gonna get on this train and someone's gonna bomb it or shoot me or whatever, or I'm getting on this train because I can't drive on the roads. Maybe you're getting on the train because you just don't want to drive and the train is just a more comfortable option. But for the folks on that train, most of them chose the train because they didn't want to drive because it just didn't feel safe enough for them. And then they were met with that. Of course, there were survivors who were able to share their witness accounts that I'm gonna share a little bit later on in the show, but there were also those who lost their lives too. And so I just want to take a moment just for us to recognize that people have died, people have lost their lives for something that our government called preventable. It's preventable, so why wasn't this prevented? If it's so preventable, why wasn't there more security who had proper training to deal with a situation like this? Or why was it that a couple of days later there was an attack at an airport? Or why was it that a week later there was an attack at a military base? If this is all preventable, why are we still seeing it happen so close to this train attack? A week later, that's not a lot of time. But then again, you're wondering, who can you blame? Because, the government can do so much. How can they fight against terrorists when they don't even know who the terrorists are? They can't even identify them. We assume that it's all part of the same group, Boko Haram, but we don't actually know that for sure, and neither does the government. And they've pretty much said so, that they still do not know who is exactly responsible for the train attacks. So how did we get to this point? Let's take a trip down memory lane, shall we? So let's go back to the 2000s, Y2K. Now, fighting began following a debate around the proposed introduction of Shariah in Kaduna State. Now, Shariah had existed in northern Nigeria for many years, but until 1999, it had only been applied to personal and domestic law. Now, from 1999 onwards, in a move which was popular among many Muslims, but highly controversial in the broader Nigerian Federation, that a lot of people felt like, hey, let's not take this step just yet. A few northern state governors actually began extending its application to criminal law and other areas that had not been previously regulated. So just a little history lesson for y'all. So basically, they wanted to make Sharia law more of the law, is the simplest way to put it. And a few states actually ended up doing that. By 2001, actually, most of Nigeria's 12 northern states had adopted some form of Sharia in criminal law as well, not just domestic or personal law. Now, although it was designed to apply only to Muslims living in the states where non-Muslim criminal suspects are not tried by Sharia courts, its application actually has been strongly opposed by Christians who find themselves directly or indirectly affected by it in different ways. Of course, if you introduce a law to a state, it's somehow going to impact everybody living there in some way or another. Even if you say that these laws are only for a certain group of people, one way or another, it's going to affect the laws. For example, prohibiting alcohol in certain places, or prohibiting women to be on transportation with men alone who aren't part of their family. These things will impact those who are just living in those areas, and not just folks who subscribe to a certain religious practice or religious views. Now, aside from these practical effects of Shariah, many Christians have also strongly opposed its applications for reasons of politics and principle, just saying, like, I'm a Christian, why should I adhere to these laws? They're not my laws per se. And they argue that it's a way of spreading or perpetuating, the historical dominance of Islam in the north. As we know that the northern part of Nigeria is predominantly Muslim people that live there, but of course there is still non-Muslims who live in those areas as well, just like everywhere else in Nigeria. I mean, we could say that the south is predominantly Christian, but of course there are still Muslims who live there too. Now, the 2000 violence, in the year 2000, sorry, I don't want to say it's 2000 violence like it's putting some sort of sum on the violence. No, in the year 2000, the violence in Kaduna took place in two main waves. Sometimes they're referred to as Shariah 1 and Shariah 2. And the first wave was in February, with further killings in March, and then the second wave followed in May. Now, there's no exact figure as to how many people actually died during the riots, but and since some were also considering missing and not technically reported to officials if they did manage to get home safe, and there were also others who were found in unmarked graves as well, buried in unmarked graves. So there's no exact figure as to how many people died during the riots, but it's an estimate between 2,000 to 5,000. A big jump, yes, it's a broad spectrum, but that is the estimate that they have, as there are no actual facts and figures. Now, the violence was mostly caused in large scale due to the population displacement, leading to a sharp segregation of peoples in Kaduna State. So majority of the Muslims migrated to the northern part of the state, and most non-Muslims migrated to the southern part of the state. Now, how did these riots basically begin? Well, Christians came together and decided they wanted to protest the proposed new Shariah laws, and some Muslims decided that they wanted to counter the protests, and that's how violence was incited between the two groups, and they started fighting and hurting each other, and people died and lost their lives, and people were injured, and all of that. That's basically what it was. It started with a protest that turned into a riot that turned very violent and became the riots of the 2000s in Kaduna State. By 2002, actually, residents were describing particular areas of Kaduna town, which is in the state, as either 100% Muslim or 100% Christian. That is how much it was segregated. Of course, there are some parts that, folks were still mingling and mixed, but for the most part, after these riots, there was a clear division, and you could see that in certain parts of the state as well. Now, I just want to put up a map of Kaduna State for us, just so we can visualize it a little bit, just to see what the central location is and to understand what that means. So Kaduna's in the yellow, orange color. And though, yes, it's closer to the northwestern part of the country, it is still pretty central to the country of Nigeria. Of course, it's not as perfectly central as our capital, Abuja, for obvious reasons, because that's the capital. But it is pretty central, and you can understand why there is such a melting pot, if you will, of ethnic groups, peoples, religions in this particular state, and understand why there would be such a division after these riots, because they thought, well, there's no point in us living together in unity or in harmony, or if you will, because we don't want to be, either the Christians are saying we don't want to be a part of those Shariah laws, we don't want to have to deal with that, we don't want to have to deal with fear of, violence coming up again later, let's just segregate and separate ourselves. Now, I do want to say something. Yes, it's understandable that we have so many ethnic groups in Nigeria, and we try as much as we can to be united by the borders that were created for us. But it's sad to think that the same issues that I'm talking about in these 2000 riots are still happening till this day, where people are still looking towards being divided by religion. Talking about, oh, Muslims do this or Christians do that. Why are we doing that? We're still living in the same country. We're still dealing with the same issues. So why are we furthering dividing ourselves on top of that? Everybody's still dealing with the same insecurity. So why are you then adding something else to divide ourselves? Everyone's just trying to focus on surviving. Let's not do more to make it more stressful for one another, right? Just a thought, just a thought. Now, after these 2000 riots, things didn't really completely settle down. And then we started seeing more conflict with farmers and herders. Now, it kind of continued and spilled over into other areas outside of course, the religion and into agriculture, basically. Now, the intensifying farmer-herder conflict in Kaduna can be traced back to an expansion of primarily cattle farmer militia groups and a rapid increase of small arms in northwest Nigeria. So we started seeing more, arms and, I guess, weaponry being more available. And then we start seeing more of these cattle farmers forming militia groups, basically wanting to the fight for more land for their cattle. As they were herders, they wanted to, as they were like moving around, they wanted more areas for their cattle to graze on. But of course, farmers were like, no, you can't do that because this is our land. We want to grow things on this. We can't have your cattle grazing on our land. And so violence and conflict erupts. Now, attacks from cattle farmer militias seeking grazing pastures for their herds, as I said, actually provoked attacks by community vigilante groups seeking to protect their farms. So on one hand, we have cattle farmer militia groups who are like, we want more land for our cattle to graze on, so we're going to take it by fire, by force, we're going to take it. And then on the other hand, we have the farmers who form their own vigilante groups saying, now we're going to protect our land because we still need to farm and basically feed our communities. Now, it sounds pretty crazy that you think farmers are literally fighting each other. Like if you go to a farm here, you see a cow dairy farm. They have their own farms, lands. Most of them are really widely separated. Like you have to drive a whole bunch before you reach the next farm, something like that. So it's just interesting now that these farmers in particular are taking it upon themselves to fight for what they believe they deserve. And, you can't always argue with people when they think they deserve something. They're going to fight essentially to the death for it. And that's kind of the cycle of conflict that has accelerated as more of these pasture lands have become more scarce over time due to population pressures and environmental degradation, again, across northern Nigeria. It's hot is the best way. It's pretty close to the Sahara Desert too, so it's hot. So there's more tension around that because there's not as much land that could be used for farming or grazing as there was before. So that also adds fuel to the tense fires. Now, both sides in Kaduna's intercommunal farmer-herder clashes increasingly use small arms that are smuggled into northwest Nigeria by gun importers who sell and distribute them through illicit markets. Okay, number 2. Remember we're saying, how did we get there? How did we get here? Okay, now, this raises a light bulb, right, for a lot of us. Who's smuggling these guns into the country so that these farmers can have access to them? Where are they coming from? How is that happening? Why is that happening? Why isn't there more control to, make sure that these guns aren't even crossing borders to make it in? Isn't that what customs for? To check whatever comes into the country so that it doesn't, it isn't something that's going to go cause any harm to anyone, or it isn't good enough for the country, or it's against whatever rules or regulations we have. I'm sure illegal guns should be against the rules and regulations of things that could be smuggled across borders, but here we have herdsmen and farmers who have armed themselves using these guns, these illegally obtained firearms and weapons. Who is to blame for that? Now, of course, you could say the government. Okay, yes, fully understand. But then let's think about who's really in charge of the day-to-day dealing with the customs. It's a trickle-down system. It's a trickle-down. Money isn't trickling down. No, corruption is trickling down, though. That's what trickles down. And we see it at almost all levels. And then that's how we have situations like this, where guns are illegally brought into certain areas and certain regions and into the country when they shouldn't be, and then land in the hands of people who probably shouldn't be dealing with firearms or weapons in general. That then leads to more violence and more insecurity and more death, essentially. farmers and cattle farmers, herders, and farmers are fighting with weapons over land. It really shouldn't have gotten to that. Now, farmers and herders aside, violence doesn't stop there in Kaduna State. Criminal gangs are also terrorizing people across the country, but we're talking about Kaduna State right now because we're talking about the crisis in Kaduna State. Now, organized criminal gangs have basically exploited the absence of a robust security presence. We're asking how things happen like this. Well, this is how. There's no actual security present to stop these things from happening. So then that allows the insecurity of non-security, allows these criminal gangs to then come up and basically say, listen, we're going to do whatever we want. And they do. They kidnap for ransom at gunpoint. They kill. And all of these different things. And you're wondering, why are they allowed so much freedom? Like, what? We don't have police. We don't have an army. We do. But somehow these criminal gangs are still managing to disrupt police stations and army bases. Like last week, there was a military base that was attacked, leaving 15 soldiers dead, 11 at the scene, and the 4 others who succumbed to their injuries after. How is that happening at a military base? You'd think that that was one of the most secure spaces, that nobody can just come in and out however they please, that there would be enough security for them to manage an attack by criminals, bandits, honestly, just gangsters. Let's call them what they are, because they probably don't have the official training that the army does, hopefully, unless they're ex-soldiers for some reason. They're basically vigilantes, but they're not really working for the greater good. They're working for their own good. And somehow we're still so insecure, and it's still an issue. We're still being terrorized by these criminal gangs and bandits till this day. I mean, so much so that they had to like ban regular people from wearing like camouflage because they wanted to like distinguish between who is really who. Like, are you a civilian or are you one of these, I get quote unquote terrorists? These are the people terrorizing folks on roads. That's why they don't feel safe enough to do road trips past a certain time. And then they end up on trains that then get bombed by a similar group of people. We don't know if it's the same, because we actually still don't know who was behind these train attacks, leaving disaster and devastation behind. I mean, just take a look at this image. This was an image from the actual train, one of the carriages from the train that was going from Abuja to Kaduna, March 28th. This is what was left. And then you ask yourself, why? What is it for? What is all of this violence for? What is it going to accomplish? Some may say for religious views, but it has to be deeper than that. Even our government doesn't even know. Our government doesn't even know who did this. They're assuming it's Boko Haram, but they don't know for sure. And then our president says, okay, this has happened. We're going to put a force together, a task force together to try and deal with these criminals without any holdback. Do what you need to do with them. Okay. They went out and they decided that they were going to try and find these criminals who, bombed and attacked our train and train railway system. But what did that lead to? Let's ask ourselves, what did that actually come about? Well, Nigeria's Air Force attack jet actually reportedly killed no fewer than 34 terrorists in a forest between Kaduna and Niger states. Military sources also said that those eliminated were allegedly behind the violence on the trains. A source said, quote, upon receiving credible information that about 2 p.m. on March 30th, 2022, about 70 terrorists and 40 motorcycles and some on foot were seen, and about 34 of them were killed. And some of their motorcycles were captured, and some of their ammunition was also captured. But they don't know who did it. So they killed 34 of them. No less than 34, by the way. It could be more. no less than 34. They know that about 70 terrorists and 40 motorcyclists and some on foot were in the general area between Kaduna and Niger states. But they don't know who. They don't know if it's Boko Haram. They don't know if it's another terrorist group that's ravaging the northern parts of Nigeria. They don't know. We're still figuring it out. Now you ask yourself, why don't they know? They don't have a budget for this kind of intelligence to investigate properly, accurately. They don't have a budget for surveillance in train stations like this so they can actually find or identify. A budget for DNA testing. A budget for any kind of investigation into this. But no, we got a few of the terrorists, but we still don't know who exactly is behind these attacks. What comfort does that bring to those who lost loved ones in this attack? What peace does that bring? How does that make them feel safe in their own country? How does that make them feel safe in the government? How does that make them feel safe in the hands of security, police, military, anything? How? How are we going to feel safe when our own government is basically telling us, we don't know, sorry, it happened, but we don't know how it happened? How do you not know? You think the civilians are going to know? The civilians that are having to deal with electricity scarcity and fuel scarcity, who don't even know if they're going to get electricity for at least a whole day, who don't know if they're going to manage to find fuel tomorrow if the electricity goes out. Can they put fuel into the generators? And even just talking about that alone, the fact that people still have to use generators in 2022, like rely on them almost. How did we get here? Some could argue that this started way back when in colonialism. Some could argue that we never really started on the right foot since independence. Some could argue that it's because democracy doesn't work in Nigeria. Whatever the argument is, something needs to change, because this cannot be a common occurrence. This cannot be something that we get so used to that when it happens, we just move on from it because, well, it's Nigeria. Like electricity now. NEPA has become a joke. People don't take it seriously anymore. Do you know how insane it is that, okay, granted, in Nigeria, they only went on lockdown for like a few weeks. But for folks who are living at home and working from home, not having the security that, yes, I'm going to have electricity for the full day and no interruptions whatsoever. That shouldn't be a thing. That shouldn't even be a thing. And then now, you have to pick between, should I travel on the road and only make sure that I'm traveling before the sun goes down so that I'm safe? Turning maybe a 3-hour journey into an 8-hour or even 2-day journey when it shouldn't be? Or thinking I can't even take the train anymore because I don't know if I'm gonna make it there safely? These aren't things people should be worrying about on top of the insecurity that they're already dealing with in the country. Our safety should almost be guaranteed in spaces like this, at the train station, at the airport, in schools, in hospitals. Granted, we can say our homes are up to us, that's our private property. If we want to have security, that's on us. But in these pretty public spaces, there should be enough security that for 2 hours, people shouldn't be like crying for help, figuring out if they're going to survive. It shouldn't even take 2 hours for police or even the army to arrive. When folks were placing calls, granted, the attack didn't happen in all of the carriages on the train, just a few of them. So there were others who were hearing what was going on in the other carriages and making calls, calling for help, tweeting, doing all of these things. And still, for at least an hour and a half, bullets were raining. Who is to blame? Criminal gangs? Citizens for not being safe enough or not being cautious enough? How can you expect that was going to happen? Nobody could expect that was going to happen. Least of all, one of the victims of this attack. Now I'm going to put a picture up now for us. Dr. Chinelo Megafu was on the train the day it was bombed and gunned down by criminal gangs from Abuja to Kaduna State. She was a dental surgeon, and she was one of the few people that tweeted about the incident, and she actually tweeted that she had been shot and asked and urged people to please pray for her life. Of course, because it's social media, there were mixed reviews. Folks were saying, if you really were shot, don't focus on tweeting, focus on saving yourself. If you were really shot, show us an actual video footage so we can believe you. Others were praying for her, trying to figure out what's going on. How are you shot? What happened? And then more and more stories started popping up of victims and witnesses and survivors of this attack who were talking about what happened. And yet, even in that, you will still notice that people will still point back to the reason for the Kaduna 2000 riots, blaming religion. You could go through the tweets. If you just look up, search on Twitter, Chinela's name, and it will come up. You can find it there. It's still there. It hasn't been deleted. It's not gone. It's still there. The people still point back and say, it's because of your Muslim brothers, or it's, your Christian brothers, whatever it is. Religion aside, someone died. And she died asking for your help. And the first thing that comes to your thought is talking about the division between religions, instead of focusing on the fact that a train was attacked with families, children, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, grandparents, uncles, aunts, loved ones. They were attacked just trying to get home or trying to get on with their life, trying to survive in a country where things are already feeling like it's in disarray. And yet we still find the time to rag on each other about it. So who is to blame? Are we also the citizens to blame for this? Do we also contribute to our own insecurity? Do we contribute to our own survival, need for survival, that we're stopping others as well? Are we being too selfish, that we're not caring about our fellow Nigerians? How do we get here? How do we get to this point that we see people who are calling for help, recounting an incredibly traumatic incident, and still finding a way to turn it into conflict and an argument on the internet? There's something bigger going on here. People are dying. That's the thing we need to focus on. And that needs to stop. So then whether it is that we need to call on our government to do more, I don't know how much more we can call on them. A government that still to this day, not that long ago, their approach to dealing with terrorists in a certain state was to turn off telecommunications services. That was their response to dealing with the situation, is we're going to make sure no one can communicate. That's going to stop them, sure. That's going to stop the guns from firing. That's going to stop people from losing their life. And then if it does happen, how will people be able to call for help? But then again, as we saw with the train station, even when they do call for help, it might still take an hour and a half for help to come, and people will still lose their lives, like Dr. Chinelaw. And what makes her story even more traumatic and gut-wrenching is, just like many others who said Nigeria is too much, I want out, she was on her way out. She was on her way to Canada 5 days. On the day of the attack, she was 5 days away from moving to Canada to start her master's program, according to a family friend. 5 days. But we can't expect that all Nigerians are just going to flee Nigeria. That can't be the only solution to this. The only solution can't be, okay, let's just pack up and move. Because not everybody has that luxury. And then what? They're left to just keep surviving? Sure, it is every man for themselves. It is a dog-eat-dog world. I understand that. But put things into perspective. That these are citizens that didn't ask for this. She's a dental surgeon. She studied to fix people's teeth. She didn't study to fight bandits. She didn't study to fight criminal gangs. She didn't study to fight this insecurity that's going on in the world. She studied to help fix people's teeth. Oral hygiene is really important as well, so respect your dentists. But that's what she studied for. What is the next step for all of us to then get military training so that we can fight them ourselves, start our own vigilante militia groups to fight them ourselves? That's like the herders and the herdsmen and the farmers did. They took things upon themselves because they knew the government wasn't going to come and save them and deal with their conflict. They weren't going to get involved. So we have to get involved for ourselves. But that only led to more violence. Is it the fact that we're not unified as a country anymore, that we're so focused on the division and continuing to divide ourselves? I don't believe that's fully true. Do you? Now, not long after these attacks happened, as I mentioned, there was a military base attack that occurred as well. About a week after, the base was attacked too. Gunmen came in to a military base, killed about 15 Nigerian soldiers and wounded about 19 of them. And of course, this happened in an army base in the northern state of Kaduna. Two army sources actually recalled on Sunday that the latest attack on security forces were by armed gangs. Which gang? They don't know. To put a name to the gang? Don't know. So it's a bunch of different gangs that are just running rampage, have no idea what, like, no one has any idea what they're doing, who they're for, who they're working for. They're just these individual groups of people who just decided they're going to come up and attack spaces. Or it's part of a bigger umbrella gang that we know as Boko Haram, which our government is leaning towards. That's what they believe it is. But these gangs rolled up and came into an army base, killed 15 gunmen. Actually, initially it was 11. 4 of them succumbed to their injuries later. And actually, it wasn't just gunmen. They also killed at least 3 civilians. In a military base. I've said it multiple times this show, but I want to reiterate it. In a military base. So what next? How do folks move on from here? Now, we're just going to take a really quick commercial break, but when we're back, we're going to continue discussing the crisis in Kaduna right now and how we got here and how we move forward. Stay tuned.
Canada's number one African barbecue, the Suya Spot. Serving and satisfying your suya needs from multiple locations across the GTA, including Scarborough, downtown Toronto, North York, Woodbridge, and Mississauga. Also located in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Visit any location today or stay home and order through
DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Skip the Dishes.
For more information, check out our website at www.thesuyaspot.com or call the toll-free line at +1 866 448 7892. The Suya Spot. You built it, now use it. Vous l'avez construit, utilisez-le.
Hello and welcome back to the Chat Up Show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aloydi, and today we're discussing the crisis in Kaduna State. From train bombings and train attacks to kidnappings and road bandits holding people at gunpoint for ransom, to military base attacks, school kids being kidnapped from schools. It's a lot of insecurity when it comes to safety in this particular state, but we could say at large in Nigeria. Now, before we went on the break, we were discussing the tragedy that befell those who were on the train on Monday, March 28th. And one of them was Dr. Chinelo Megafu, who was a dental surgeon. We're talking about her story and how she was so close to getting out of Nigeria, but this took her life. And before we went on the break, I'd asked, where do we go from here? How do we get here and where do we go from here? Let's kind of backtrack back to the 2000s riots and how I mentioned that the exact figure of people who had died during those riots are unknown. Now, some say that it's because, of course, there were people who were missing, the unmarked graves, that's why it was hard to count and keep a track of the number. But others say that it's maybe because the government is trying to downplay the severity of the situation. Keep that in our minds, okay? Now, since those attacks, at least 168 people are still considered missing, according to reports. 168. There are about less than 300 passengers. So that's over half. Still missing. Now, of course, it could be because folks maybe disappeared during the night and found a way to get home safely, but they haven't reported that they've been found yet. But it's also, according to eyewitness accounts of folks who were on the train, witnessing gunmen escorting passengers into the forests. That is also why our Air Force decided to go into the forest between Kaduna and Niger states to go and kill the about 34 criminals, is what they are, criminals and terrorists, because this is a terrorist attack. That's how they were able to kill them. And whether they have found those missing people hasn't been shared just yet. They don't know. They are still considered missing till today. So begs to wonder, if you were able to kill and technically, I guess, capture those 34 criminals, what about the victims that were kidnapped as well? So they dealt with the trauma on the train of the bombing, the shootings, and then the trauma of being kidnapped and still not found. Now, the gangs have been described as terrorists by our government and have caused havoc in northwest Nigeria by attacking villages, towns, schools, all of this. As I mentioned, that this isn't just something that's happened this year, this isn't just this month, this is over years that this has been going on. So it begs to wonder why there isn't more security being put in place when you know that this is already happening. Why is it being allowed to happen more and again and again? Like, why isn't there more security being put in place into these certain places? Why don't we have the infrastructure to put in, I don't know, try to hack these devices that they use? What, they don't have cell phones? They don't have laptops? They're not communicating with each other? Are they sending carrier pigeons, telegraphs? Like, how are these criminals communicating with one another? There has to be some form or level of communication. I mean, our government understood that much. That's why they decided to shut off telecommunication services. They understood, well, they must be communicating with each other some way. With all the talent that we have in Nigeria, there's no way to utilize that talent to try and start a task force of investigation. Not a physical task force, which is what we're used to. We don't mean just put people on the streets. We mean people who need to be behind the scenes. Surveillance, if you will. Investigating this. That if it keeps happening, then there must be something here that we need to look at. Hello? All of the red flags are flying in the air right now. Like, why is it that this one state has gone through so much for these last 20 decades? That there's so much violence. And there hasn't been like any energy, it seems, put behind actually trying to investigate or figure it out. Now, we do have one question on our Facebook from a Miss Ege Oshodin. My apologies if I mispronounced her name. Now the comment says, quote, "What's happening in Nigeria needs God's intervention. Over the years, promises have been made by different national leaders in tackling the issues of insurgency, but all the efforts have been fruitless. To me, if Nigeria as a country is serious about putting an end to these killings, especially in the north, they can." Honestly, Ms. Ege, that's a sentiment a lot of people agree with. That there should be, that if they really wanted to put an end to this, that they can and they should. Okay, then that begs to question the other question of why aren't they then? If the majority of Nigerians believe that the government does have the power or control to put a stop to it, which truthfully they probably do, why haven't they? It's almost like every week, in 2021 especially, it was almost like every week we were hearing about school kids being kidnapped. 400 here, 500 here, 100 here, 200 here, that adds up to 1,400, 1,400 in total in 1 year in broad daylight. And then when we realize that our government is bartering with the kidnappers, wow. How are you bargaining with the people who are causing so much insecurity and insurgency in your country? Isn't this the time that you show them and make, an example of them? Like, you can't do this. We can't forget when the Chibok schoolgirls were kidnapped. And then that picture surfaced online of, I guess, supposed Boko Haram leaders, if you will, all dressed in white. Brought together by, I think, one of our governors as a means to say, listen, they're going to stop, that they're going to bring back our girls. a decade later, people are still being kidnapped. So I don't know what that did to solve the issue or what that helped to deal with it. Now, one thing about Nigerians is regardless of religion, Nigerians will pray. Okay? Nigerians will pray over this nation of ours. That's one thing I can guarantee you. If you go to any crossover service or anything, or even a mosque, and you ask a fellow Nigerian, did you pray about Nigeria? They're probably going to say yes. Because for so many people, this is all they know. All they know is this level of insecurity. For some, back in the day, for those who were alive, in, I guess, the 70s or maybe the 80s, who knew that Naira and dollar were basically equivalent compared to the rest of us, where Naira is now 500 to $1 US almost. Some of us only know this insecurity. This is the only Nigeria we know. We don't know about the good old days, quote unquote, that we could go back to. We don't know what that looks like. But what we do know is it can't continue this way. We can't continue losing lives over area boys with guns. And that just, again, what is our government going to do about it? How is our government going to make a change? As Ms. Ege said, that, they can if they truly wanted to. So why is this not enough of a wake-up call for them to wake up and realize that maybe the energy that they're putting towards certain task forces isn't fruitful? So they need to restructure. President Buhari said, go out and deal with these criminals the way they deserve to. Okay, 34 of them dead, but we know that there were at least 70. So where are the others? What's going to happen to them? They're just going to go off into the wind and then pop up again in a couple months again to do the same thing? To kill more people? To cause more fear? To instill more fear and insecurity? To make more people be fearful of their own country? Of the roads that they've probably traveled thousands of times before, but now you're thinking twice about it. It's sad. It is. I mean, this whole situation, I can't lie. I'm going to be honest with you guys. We're honest on the Chat Up Show. It's a sad situation because you listen and you watch and you think there's so much potential in our country. And we all see it. We all know it. I mean, we see when Nigerians leave and we flourish. Why can't we flourish in our own country? Why is it that so many people feel that the only option now is to leave? Why? Why can't we have the same pride that we have outside in our own country enough to fix it? Now, I'm not here to play the blame game and say this is whose fault, this is your fault. I'm just here to share what has happened and what our government and how our government has responded to it and what that has led to. More violence, basically. It hasn't stopped it. They haven't retreated. They haven't said, "Oh, we're scared of the government's reaction to this, so we're going to stop." No, they're basically telling our government, "We don't care. Do whatever you want to do. We're going to keep doing what we need to do." Because not long after the train attack, armed criminal gangs went to an airport and shot somebody and killed somebody too. Not long after, knowing full well that people are on top of this train attack situation, they did not care. They said, we still have a mission, we're going to kill someone at the airport. And that just tells you that they're not fearful of anything. They don't fear police, army, government, no, Air Force, nothing. Because how could they keep doing this? Keep going. Keep kidnapping, keep holding people at ransom. Keep ravaging communities, villages, towns, schools, hospitals. Keep instilling fear. It's because they know they can to some degree. And they've gotten away with it for so long. So many times they've gotten away with it. There haven't been real consequences. Sure, I mean, some of them have lost their lives. That's a real consequence, of course. But overall, not to the same level as civilians and innocent people who have lost their lives. We are 1 year away from elections. A lot of Nigerians who don't have their voter card I would encourage you to go out and get it and actually pay attention to these. Don't just be voting on someone because they gave you a bag of rice. Please. We see what's going on in our country. We realize that we need better leadership who will put into action things that will keep us safe, things that will make living easier, so it's not just survival of the fittest every single day of our lives. Again, this is not the blame game. This is just kind of a wake-up call, not just for our government, but for ourselves too. That yes, a lot of things are out of our control, but not everything. We're still in a democracy at the end of the day. If we feel that our government isn't working for us, which is what we vote them into power to do, then we then have the right, when it's time, to vote for someone who we feel will work for us. That is what we need to do as Nigerians. We need to start opening our eyes, not just looking at the pretty materialistic campaigns that are put out there. Actually looking at the cold hard facts is what's going on in our country, how it's affecting you on an individual scale. Because the electricity and the fuel scarcity, whether you live in Lekki, Banana Island, wherever, it's still going to impact you in some way. Because I know we like to acknowledge, the economic divide in the country. But either way, these things are still impacting you, because no matter how rich you are, no matter how much money you have, if you still have to live in the country and you still have to use those roads, you are impacted by the decisions our government makes, which means that that's on you now to make the decision for yourself, to choose the government for you that you feel will work right for you. Now, I do want to leave it on a positive note because I don't like leaving on a negative note. That felt a little heavy. I will say, one thing that I appreciate about us is we are fighters, regardless. I mean, we saw it with folks who were on the trains, who are still fighting for their lives, asking for prayer, asking for help, that we are still fighters. And we still hold on to that hope that we will one day see a great Nigeria where insecurity isn't even on the forefront of our minds. It's a distant memory, where we don't have to worry about taking road trips anywhere because, we won't have to deal with armed gangs and militia groups. We won't have to fight for ourselves and fight for our survival. We will have things in place, infrastructures in place that does it for us. That when we go to the hospital, we know we'll receive the care we need and not have to wait on the bill to be paid before we receive it. That we can send our kids to school knowing that they will come back to us at the end of the day because the school is safe and secure enough for them. So many Nigerians still hold on to that hope, and I encourage you to hold on to that hope today. That despite what we're seeing right now in this news, we can still make decisions that will better our life in the future. AKA 2023 elections. Because this violence is enough. And one problem that affects one part of Nigeria affects us all. Because I know we like to say, oh, that's just the north, it doesn't impact us. It will. It will. Now that concludes the Chat Up Show today. Sorry. Thank you to everyone that joined us. As always, you can keep up with the GBKM network in various ways. You can continue to listen and watch live 24/7 at www.gbkm.tv or www.gbkm.fm. You can also download our free app, just search GBKM to take us on the go, and you will receive a notification every time we go live. Also follow us on YouTube and Facebook at GBKM Network to continue to watch us live and join in the conversation. Thank you to all of you who did today. And you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter for more updates at GBKM Network. And you can follow me, your host, on Instagram and Twitter at TIS_Liz_O. I'll see you the same time, same place next week. Take care.
Canada's #1 African barbecue, the Suya Spot. serving and satisfying your suya needs from multiple locations across the GTA, including Scarborough, downtown Toronto, North York, Woodbridge, and Mississauga. Also located in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Visit any location today or stay home and order through
DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Skip the Dishes.
For more information, check out our website at www.thesuyaspot.com or call the toll-free line at +1 866 448 7892.